Hello, I'm Dave Feinleaf, and this is Beyond the Shelf. This show is an open exploration of the people and process behind e-commerce. Through conversations with innovators in the space, we learn the stories of these leaders and their strategies for e-commerce success. You can find out more about how we're helping leading brands and retailers optimize content at scale and learn about our new sell sheet builder at itsrapid.ai. My guest on today's show is Nicolai Soendergaard, Director of Omni Enablement at Newell Brands. At Newell, Nicolai leads development and execution of the strategic roadmap and capabilities that are enabling the company to become an industry leader in the omni and e-commerce world. Nicolai's key areas of focus include omni-commerce strategy deployment and retail.com focus across the omni customer base, emerging customers, assortment strategy and optimization, alternative fulfillment and drop shipping, and content syndication and overall digital shelf initiatives. Prior to Newell, Nicolai was director of pure play e-commerce at Kellogg Company and digital marketing manager for Amazon at Lego Group. We cover Nicolai's journey from Lego to his current role at Newell, his insights about digital shelf and retail media, and how he and his team are using AI to accelerate e-commerce and retail media content creation and optimization. Please enjoy my conversation with Nicolai Soendergaard. Nicolai, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dave. Pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to this.
Take us back, if you would, to how you got your start in the space. You like to say that you were basically born at Legoland in Denmark.
Yeah, because I basically was. So European by nature and origin, but been spending the last decade and a half here in the United States. So yeah, I mean, how did I get started in this space? Candidly, it was a little bit of I feel like a fumble into it right out of college. Always had a passion for, I guess the digital, the sort of emergence of Amazon kind of always fascinated me. So yeah, I kind of stumbled into that through an option, driving some work at Lego at the time, right, managing the Amazon business back then, when it was a pretty small endeavor, if you will, for that organization.
Tell us, did you have a favorite Lego model growing up? How does that work?
Yeah, I probably had a lot, to be honest with you. I was always a big fan of the Lego architecture sets. That's, if you don't know them, it's I actually have a couple behind me over here. You can see some of the mini models of the different skylines across the globe. So big fan of that particular field. And now with my little daughters, it's a lot of Disney princess that ends up in our house.
I love it. How did you decide to cross the ocean, if you will, and come over to the U.S.?
Yeah, it's a great question. A lot of people actually ask me that. It's like, why did you leave a country that has free healthcare, free education, and then go to a country to pay for your own education and pay for your own healthcare? Well, I think for me, it was Denmark is a pretty homogeneous society, right? It's not a lot of cultural diversity, I guess. So for me, it was always about different. I always grew up traveling, enjoy traveling. Different cultures always been a big part of my life. Fortunate to grow up in a family that prioritized that lifestyle, right? So really that was the impetus for me, and I think for the US specifically, I mean, it's such a melting pot, right, of diversity and culture, and it's such a large country. So it was always sort of appealing to me. It really was supposed to be a 1-year journey, and 15 years later, I'm still here. So
it is always interesting, and I think exciting and fun to see how our journeys will play out. You never know when the 1-year adventure will turn into 5, and before you know it, 10, 15 years. So really excited for the journey you've been on, and also what's ahead. Now, you spent several years managing the Amazon business for Lego. Would you share some of your insights and learnings from that time?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was honestly the coolest brand to work for right out of college at the time, because it's such a well-known brand, right? I think most people across the globe knows this company. They know the nostalgic, right? The red logo and everything. So it was a very unique experience in the sense that even though Lego is a relatively small organization compared to some of the behemoths that exist in CP and other spaces in the US. They carry an awful lot of weight, even with large customers such as Amazon, right? Where if you think about customers like Apple, they're a very, very large company, and you presume they know when they're on Amazon, they have all kinds of perks, presumably in terms of how they show up on page, etc. Lego wasn't quite there, but the seats we got at the table, the access we got, I mean, it was a very interesting experience to really get deep into Amazon, what was truly possible, and not necessarily just get cut off at the self-service modules, if that makes any sense. So we got a lot of really interesting stuff off the ground there. A lot of the focus there was really on actually upskilling and educating our upstream stakeholders, right? Like, how do you really think about the digital world? And what was interesting about Lego, as you probably know, or you may not know this term, but there's a terminology in that field that's deemed AFOL, adult fans of Lego. So there's a huge collector society in that space, right? So as the whole sort of transition to e-commerce, obviously Lego products are a great fit for e-commerce shipping because they're square and fit in boxes really well. But there's also a downside to it. There's a lot of desires for consumers to receive them in mint condition, right? So even the tiniest dent will cause people to return or get frustrated, right? So there was a lot of I'd say development on the supply chain side in the early days. Like, how do we think differently about go to market so it doesn't stop at what used to be the retailer, but it actually stops at the consumer, right? We have to think all the way through. And then I'd say the other thing that we spent a fair bit of time on was this is really when Amazon advertising was starting to get off the ground. I'd say at a material scale, right? So that was sort of one of the roles I played there was we really got involved heavily with how do we show up on page, right? Sort of again, obviously SEO wasn't new because Google had invented it many years earlier, but it was kind of new in the sense that Amazon was pushing it, and there was a lot more. You probably remember this, right? In the early days, there was a lot of keyword stuffing, right, which wasn't always pretty, and I think that's gotten better over the years. But at the time here, it was a lot of really trying to figure out with these platforms that were super in their infancy, how to manage and maneuver, and candidly, if I reflect back on it, there were some niceties around that too, because we could rely on our buyers and our programs on Amazon to do a lot more of the manual lifting. And now I think we're much more dependent on machines and algorithms to do the work for us, which can have pros and cons, as you probably know.
Absolutely. For brands that maybe don't have the brand recognition of a Lego, that are maybe in a way have that aura a bit in the market, are there some tips, some rules of the road that you might share with them that they could leverage from some of these well-known brands?
I think there's a couple, right? I think there's a piece around like you got to have your, let's call your operational efficiencies in check, right? And that's particularly, I think, true with a customer like Amazon or a platform like Amazon, I should say, right? Because you will get crushed very, very fast if you don't have a very streamlined end-to-end supply chain to kind of dumb it down a little bit, right? I think the constant changing requirements in terms of whether you go direct through Amazon, your 3P, FBA, all those different modes, like it's very, very important to have your it's called your business operations in a very healthy state, because otherwise you will get eaten up in fees, and candidly that can really quickly change a good business to a really bad business, right? And then I think some of the stuff we'll talk about today, right? I think there's also some discipline here where candidly I think smaller brands particularly have a lot of legs up on big manufacturers, like where I work today, right? As it relates to ability to move with speed and adapt with speed, right? And I think the era AI will only enhance that and candidly make it harder for big manufacturers to keep up, right? Because we like to do things at scale, right? That's kind of the whole business model. So I think it's really keeping the foundational business practices in check. Depending on your category, there's different nuances, and then really deploying, particularly in the things at speed that where some of the bigger guys will have a tough time keeping up, right?
Great insights. Before we move on to Kellogg and your time now at Newell, you had some pretty neat ways of bringing that physical experience to the online, to e-commerce, where we sometimes we wish we could reach through the screen and product in our hands, but we can't. And so we're trying to replicate that. Would you take a moment and talk about some of the fun things that you did there?
Absolutely, yeah. So Lego is, like I think a lot of brands who are single brand companies or care a lot about their brand equity or the goodwill in the brand, right? We spend a lot of time thinking about how do we not just do tactical, bottom of the funnel, paid search, whatever. How do we actually bring the brand experience, which in the case of Lego is very much, it's nostalgic for kids, going under the tree at Christmas, grabbing the package, the box, and they shake it and they hear the bricks in there, and that creates excitement, right? How do you replicate that type of experience in a digital environment? It's kind of hard. At least we thought it was initially, and So one of the things we did, which I thought was really, really cool in the early days, right? So we had executed this piggyback onto our larger, let's call it TV ad, like a larger national scale media campaign Lego was doing at the time, which was called Shake Up Your Imagination, right? The way we thought through that through a digital lens was we partnered with Amazon in this particular instance, and we integrated a wake screen. For those that are not familiar with the wake screen, if you have a Fire tablet or the like, right, when you open it up, there will typically be an advertising or an ad or something on it if you don't subscribe to the premium service. We took over that wake screen. It would be like a, basically like a Lego like background, and it would be a bunch of bricks on the screen. And then if you shook it, it would make the sound of, the bricks, kind of crinkling back and forth. And I mean, the amount of time we spent on getting that sound right, I mean, it was really fascinating. And we spent a lot of time with some really cool creative teams within, the Amazon advertising organization at the time. And honestly, turned out to be a great execution. I still remember one of the KPIs, which was a new KPI for all of us. We never used this before. Was shakes. Like how many times have people actually shook the ad? I forget the exact number, but it was pretty well received, and I thought it was a cool way to really take what was a physical experience and kind of really prove that you can do some of these things with a little creativity, right, in the digital world.
So perhaps giving new meaning to the S in ROAS, we can have return on shakes. I love it. I love it.
Return on shakes. That's a great one.
Yeah. So some great insights there, and some, frankly, really fun ways to bring the product to life. From Lego, you then went to Kellogg, another incredible brand and business, and there you managed a 9-figure business line. Talk to us about what some of your learnings were from your time at Kellogg.
Yeah, so I think a very different business model. To your point, really, really strong brands as well. But even though Kellogg had arguably equally strong brand to Lego, at least recognized brand to Lego, much tougher categories to operate within, right? Because there's a lot more competition. Candidly, there's not a lot of Legos, but there's a lot of cereal boxes. There's a lot of snacks in the market, and candidly, more and more adopting into it every day. Barriers to entry is not as high, right? So I'd say that the focus in that world, it was super interesting. And we spent, I'd say, a lot more time on what I would call like foundational economics. Like, how do we actually take these digital businesses that have been stood up between Amazon, Core, Pantry, Fresh over the years, right? That was very investment dependent early on, with some really large and extravagant, I think, assumptions Amazon had made in the early days around like, we're going to make this $100 million business by 3 years, but you got to put, almost 100% of your invoice down, up front, right, to really prove the value and drive the business. So it was a lot of, actually, I'd say, almost going back economics 101 is like, we got to manage the P&L, we got to get back to profitability, we got to get back to a level of sustainability, right? And I think that the simple analogy, right, is just, there's just not a world where anyone's going to make money on shipping a $3 cereal box across the country, no matter how great of a shipping infrastructure you have, right? So it's really being strategic, and I'd say how we think about assortment planning, what SKUs go where, the price point architecture or revenue growth management in a digital space, right? Like, how do we think about the best way to create products that meet the needs of the online shopper who might be willing to buy a little bit more bulky items, right? How does that differentiate from the club channel, which is obviously a similar but slightly different experience? So we spend a lot of time on that. I'd say the assortment planning and really the role of that channel, right? And I think a role, and I know we'll come back to this a little bit later. I think we did hit pretty hard on, even though, particularly in the grocery category, even post COVID, the penetration is still pretty low, right? You still see the bulk of grocery purchase take place in store, and probably always will. But the digital content, like the representation of our product, was still quite critical, because people would actually frequently use digital pages to understand more about nutrients and ingredients, right? That you might not be able to obtain at the store. If you're preparing to go to a store, you might want to do the research before you get to the store, so you don't have to look for 16 different labels while you're standing at the aisle. Like that, nobody really enjoys that. I think I at least don't enjoy grocery stores that much, but so yeah, very different types of experiences and challenges, and candidly, I would argue much harder environment to be operating within, just given the amount of competition, right? So yeah, super interesting.
Now, fast forward to today, you're heading up Newell's strategy and roadmap to become an industry leader in an omni and e-commerce world. And this year, frankly, we've seen a lot of news about in-store and omni-channel. And would you tell us about that and what you're focused on now at Newell?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think Omni is definitely a bit of a buzzword, right? In some shape or form, right? I think it's kind of become, I guess, the next version of e-commerce, right? Or whatever you want to refer to it as. I think the way we've been trying to define it here, right, have been really around, like, we're trying to create a simple and synergetic experience, whether you're shopping online, doing research in store, like whatever medium or engagement model the customer goes for, we want them to have the same experience with the product, right? That's really what we've been anchored on. And as you can see, right, through some of the priorities that we've kind of ultimately baked into this role that we built in. I don't think I've seen Omni enablement exist anywhere else, but I'm getting more and more fond of it the more time I spend here, because I think there's a lot of good things tied to it. Because it's really about building capabilities that enable our sales teams, brand teams, supply chain partners to be more successful in a digital world, right, or in a quote unquote omni world. And you upfront, right, you mentioned things like also fulfillment. Like, how do we think about the role of dropship in a world where we prefer, or historically prefer, to do domestic DI type shipment models? What role should dropship play in that? How do we improve the capability to make it as efficient and for both us and our partners as possible? Same thing goes with content, right? How do we stand up the right infrastructure? And in the case of Newell, right, we've been a company who's gone through a journey of I'd say really a turnaround, where we're starting to see some great momentum, but really around like, how do we create the infrastructure? We're kind of referring to it as our content supply chain, which candidly I think is equally important to other aspects of supply chains, that the more traditional supply chains, right? Because it's about how do we get our information from our systems to our retailer systems the most efficiently with the least amount of human interaction, candidly, right? Because there's just too many touch points today to touch them all. So yes, it's a super interesting space, and it's really around capability building. How do we think about go to market in the digital world?
On this note of capabilities, I think that's a perfect bridge to talk about some of the capabilities that we've been working on with you around digital shelf, content creation, optimization, and to your point about sales enablement as well, using various techniques, automation, generative AI, streamlining some workflows. Will you share with us some of those capabilities from your point of view and how you're putting them to work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we talked about it earlier, right? Some of the challenge I think big companies like us are really trying to adapt to and evolve into, right, in this new world, is like, how do we move with speed, right? I think AI is really enhancing that or advancing that requirement, candidly, because a lot of our competitors are of course other big brands, but candidly, we're seeing a lot more competition now from some of the insurgents, right, who are really taking advantage of this digital route to market, whether it's from Walmart Marketplace, Amazon Marketplace, right? So I think for us, candidly, it's going to be, I think, mission critical to be able to deploy some of these let's call them automation solutions that we're trying to build with yourself and the team on. How do we, I mean, very tactical examples, but how do we get more disciplined about being able to write copy multiple times, your seasonal copy, and actually maintain that across a portfolio like Newell's, which is thousands upon thousands of SKUs, right? Where we cannot have an army or 600 copywriters sitting and writing out every single day, because it's just not cost efficient, and candidly, there's not probably enough copywriters in the world for every big manufacturer to do that. So that's I think one of our key use cases, right, where we've been getting into, is like, how do we enable that as the first step, right, and just either rewriting it, adapting it, and kind of catering to how the environment is changing. Because as we know, right, I mean, people search very differently at different times of year, right? Like, how do we cater to our shopper and ultimately make the shopper experience better, right, through that lens as it relates to providing people what they're looking for when they're looking for it, and make sure they have all the bells and whistles and the details they're searching for.
This page optimization capability, if we rewind and look back 5 years, certainly 10 years, but even a few years back, there was this idea that you could set up your item, it went live, and in some ways you were kind of done at that point. You got through the heavy lifting. When I hear you talk about this, that's really changed. You're thinking about updating this content, seasonal changes throughout the year. What's the thinking on that, and the shift perhaps that's happening around that higher frequency of updating?
Well, I mean, I think the biggest myth, right, in I would argue in the digital omni e-commerce world, is like this concept of the endless aisle, right? Like, sure, you can set up every single item under the sun, and it can live on some .com sites, but the reality is, like, if you're not on the first page, you don't really matter, right? I mean, like, what's that Google saying? Right, you can hide a dead body on page 2 of Google, right? Type of thing. I think the same does apply to Amazon, right? There's plenty of studies out there that suggest that the first page amount to 70 to 80% of total clicks, right? That's garnered against the keyword. So I think that's sort of the myth that we've been trying to debunk, is like, we got to get a lot better at a lot fewer and a lot more frequent updates, if you will, tied to our products. And I think what we're finding is just that's really where small brands just do a phenomenal job, right, in this space. And so I think for us, it's really around like, how do we get adaptability in that? And I think also, if you reflect on how the digital marketplace works, right? I mean, you're not necessarily favored or advantaged if you are pushing new SKUs every single week, right? Like it's really the items that get to live longer lives now. And if you think about some of the categories that Newell Brands play within, right? I mean, we're in baby. We don't really want to have to relaunch our car seats every year because there's also all kinds of safety things and the benefits in really building a trust with the shopper. So I think being able to constantly stay relevant with the trends and how they change, it's just becoming more and more important for us.
A virtual relaunch in a way. You keep the same
Yep.
product, but yet you can
Yep.
refresh it and make sure it stays relevant.
Exactly.
So really exciting work there. Can you share with us potentially some of the impact and the performance results from some of the work we've done together there around refreshing the content?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a couple of different buckets we're looking at performance here in terms of like payback on some of the stuff that we're doing together, right? I think one is really around how is it going to improve our overall, let's call it our product sales, right? Obviously can't share any detailed data there, but generally speaking, the way we're looking at it is like how do we improve the everyday sell through of our products, where we've seen some really great results on some of our categories we've been diving into as we think about more, again, like I said, the seasonal keyword integration to make sure that when people are out there looking for tailgate items or camping items, like we are showing them the most relevant assortment possible, right? So we've seen some really great momentum in that space. So the other area that is a little bit more internal, but can be a key measure of success tied to the joint effort we're driving is really hours saved, right? So the bucket we're thinking about here is, if we were to go and rewrite, I'm making this up, right, a copy for 200 SKUs, it might take us, 60 hours with a copywriter, right? We can do that in a matter of minutes, right, through some of these tools we're building together, which Candy allows a level of scale we just haven't seen before. And now, obviously, the next phase of this becomes how do we maintain it and optimize it, and again, continue to automate that end-to-end workflow. So those are really the two buckets that I know we're talking a lot internally about, like the justification for this work, how we're looking to fund it in the future, and all that kind of stuff is really going to come through the time save, incremental output, and then of course the everything we do as an organization or any organization, right, is to drive more revenue, right? But those are the two key buckets we've been trying to quantify a lot here internally.
These are great, really helpful kind of KPIs to be thinking about. Another great example building on that is this image generation area, specifically this ability to take these single images of products and create these multi-packs, virtual image multi-packs. Would you talk about the pain point, the genesis of the idea there, and a little bit about the solution?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's actually two here, right? There's the image creation and the post-production, which we can talk a little bit about too. But I say on the image creation side, it's historically, right, creating an image, no matter what kind of image, you typically have to go, take a photo or, take an existing photo, go through Adobe, rejigger it on a canvas, and then ultimately, spit it out to the specs that you need. There's a fair amount of time stuck in that, right? And there's, again, people hours associated with it. And some of the things we've been dabbling in, right, have been around like how do we test more products, right, in the digital world to really help inform our innovation pipeline, but also really what resonates with our shoppers, right? Like what kind of candles do we want to buy together? Like, we obviously did this a lot at Kellogg too, right, where we're looking at, well, we don't really know what flavors people want to buy together. So let's test 16 different variants, and then whichever one people seem to resonate with through what they buy the most, we will double down on, and we'll make them better, and we'll improve them. The problem, of course, in all this is every time you create something new online, you need content, right? That's the one variable that holds true. And if you're relying on, I'd say, legacy, like image creating processes, it gets very expensive very fast, right? So I think this has been a huge unlock for us to really take, hey, I don't want to sell this as a single anymore. I don't create it as a 4-count, plug it through a system, and then it spits out a modified version that meets the requirements we kind of set forth.
It's a great workflow, really being able to A/B test in a way these different combinations and then have the content to go with that. So a great unlock. One other area I wanted to touch on is this sales enablement. You really have this expertise, I think, in being able to see the entire business all the way from supply chain to the content that shows up for the shopper to even the unboxing of the physical product, which is a really broad and insightful way to think about that customer experience. This sell sheet piece is perhaps something that gets not as much visibility as the digital shelf, but is extremely important for sales enablement. Tell us a little about that and what the use case is there.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one actually, and I'm pretty excited we kind of co-developed this one because I think there's a really big applicability here, particularly to organizations that have large field sales organizations, right? So if you think about this through the lens of a lot of our business, we have a lot of people out there who are selling to local, regional customers, right? Where again, it goes back to the legacy way you'd gone to market here would have been you'd print physical catalogs and you'd ship them to people, and they would share them with their customer, and then every time a spec or a material component slightly changed, you had to reprint that whole thing and resend it out, right? A lot of cost tied to that. So I think that the sales sheet builder here is really interesting because what we're trying to do is we're really trying to leverage our syndication data, right? Our Salsify data, whatever content, PIM, DAM solution you deploy, or PXM, whatever you want to call it these days, that you deploy as a manufacturer. You really want to take that data, script it into the sell sheet builder we built with you, and then effectively take that and say, okay, well, every time something changes, I don't have to worry about updating my sales team because they already have the refresh version once the source data changes, right? Other ways that have been managed historically, in my experience, have really been through PowerPoints. So as you can imagine, even in a PowerPoint world, even though it's digital, you might not have to print it, but you still have to maintain it, right? So every time a small spec changes, R&D makes a change, doesn't get to brand, there's all kinds of issues that could happen with that, right? Even in the best of organizations. So I'm pretty excited about the applicability of this. And again, like I said, I think really for not just for organizations with field sales orgs, but I do think that's a huge applicability area there, which a lot of FMCGs do play a lot in that space.
It's a great unlock, and really one we've been super appreciative about, being able to build together real world data, taking something that's already happening, but making it available, and this ability to scale and make it repeatable, I think is really, really exciting, and kind of great to see the data world and the design worlds coming together a little bit. One thing I love about working with you and working with Newell is that we do have this really nice partnership on bringing these new capabilities to market. Will you share a little about how that is and what's working well there?
I think the analogy you're drawing, I mean, I mostly spend my time in large Fortune 500 companies, right? So, and love it. Great place to be. Would recommend everyone to do it at least at some point in their career. But I'd say the biggest downside of us is like we're built for scale, right? In most of our cases, which means we have very, in most cases, good process, ways of working, and it works really well at scale, right? Where we sometimes struggle is, we're not necessarily as nimble to develop, let's call workarounds or tweak to adapt to a market, and that's why eComm really have challenged I think a lot of legacy manufacturers across pretty much all verticals, right? So I think being able to partner with someone like you and the team where we can kind of say these are the problems we're running into, like how do we construct this, like here, this is the data we have, like how do we create a technical solution that integrates with our base systems and ways of working, but gives us the flexibility, right, to move faster, right? And I think that's honestly the most exciting thing, I think, from our team's perspective, is we get someone who has the technical expertise, the willingness to build new stuff, right? That if we were to do that through legacy models, would take us way too long, right? So that's really the main value add, and where we see a lot of exciting stuff to come from this joint partnership.
Really, really exciting and really tremendous scale. Just to give our listeners a sense of the scale, you have a number of different brands. You have maybe tens, even hundreds of thousands in some cases of images, descriptions, data, fields, things like that to support this catalog. So it's really exciting for us as well to be able to work at this scale and bring some of these solutions to market with you. So really excited about the path ahead there. Talking about what's ahead, we did touch on AI, but gotta come back to it one more time. What's on the horizon for you as you think about kind of the next year, but also even beyond that? How do you see AI, but other technologies being adopted and deployed?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I mean, I think there's some professional service areas that I'm really excited for it to get more tactical deployment in, right? So, if you think about some of the things we spend a lot of time on in most organizations, right? It's how do we build PowerPoint slides? How do we build Excel documents? Like all this stuff, if you can script some of that stuff and I can create me a Gantt chart with this data, it's really about making everyone more efficient and productive in their day to day. So we can do a lot more with the same, right? That's the end state, I think, in all of it. I think specific to the digital world, right? I think there's a lot more evolution to come in, I think we're just scratching the surface on the image side. Like, I think we're doing some of the foundational stuff. I think what will get really exciting is to really get into, some of the more costly areas, like taking lifestyle photo shoots. It's not cheap in many cases, right? Like, how do we do that, leveraging some of these AI models, language models, to really take our base images and just place them in different environments that would allow, again, our sales teams to maybe be more capable of adapting to, like, hey, we got a fall thing going on here. Like, may not be justified to create a master campaign, but hey, we really want to do this for this customer because we think it's relevant. Like, we might be able to do some of that more nimble. Like, again, as I said, I think we're just scratching the surface on that one. And yeah, I think that's the main one. And then, I do think there'll be some interesting stuff too on the supply chain side in terms of how we connect inventory flows, in stock levels, adapt to spikes in demand, and signal some of that stuff back and forth, which I know in area we haven't spent a lot of time on. But how do you signal peak demand back to forecast? There's all kinds of areas there that I think are still untapped and unexplored. But there's a lot of time that goes into forecasting and planning and all that fun stuff. And if you could get just a little bit better at sending those signals in real time based on fluctuations at retail, that's going to be. It's going to be a lot of dollars to be harvested there. Yeah.
I've really enjoyed our conversation today. Before we wrap up, I have a few quick closing questions I'd love to ask you if you're game.
Yeah, absolutely.
First, and I know this is a tough one to narrow it down to two, but if you had to choose just two, what two people have inspired you the most in your professional life?
I think there's, let's call it, people that are maybe more known to the, let's call it, the general public, right, would be, I am a big fan of a guy called Mark Manson. I'm not sure if you heard of him. He's written a couple of books. Their names are a little inappropriate, but one is called The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F. And I think that the reason I found that book quite appealing is it's, I don't know if I'd call it a self-help book or whatever, but it's really around, I think, this concept of, you only have so many F's to give in life. So make sure when you do care about something, it's important to you, right? So it was foundational stuff. And another thing, and I'm sure you know this guy, but I'm a big Scott Galloway fan. Find him quite entertaining, and obviously he's written a couple of really interesting books as well, like The Algebra of Happiness and a few others. Where a big fan of his, and I think he has a really interesting, approach to life. And he spent a lot of his time also doing assessments, right, of the big four, as he refers to the Amazon, the tech, the Googles, the Apples, the Facebooks. So I'd say those two have been individuals that have really been interesting to kind of follow, and candidly, the way they look at the world has been, quite influential throughout my life.
When you do get some time outside of work, if you get some time, what are some of your hobbies? How do you like to spend your time outside of work and family?
Before I had kids, I had a lot of free time. Not so much anymore. I'm a big gamer. I grew up gaming. I'm mostly a PC guy myself, not a huge console guy. But I grew up gaming. I spent way too much time of my youth playing World of Warcraft. Thankfully gotten myself separated from that a little bit now because it took up too much life. But I do enjoy a good strategy game. That's always been enjoyable to me, and a great way to disconnect from the reality sometimes.
If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to find you online?
Yeah, LinkedIn is probably my preferred path. I'm not a big social media guy, so LinkedIn would be the route.
Well, Nicolai, thanks for the incredible collaboration with you and your team, and for an amazing conversation today.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Dave, and I'm looking forward to many more opportunities to come here. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed today's show. Beyond the Shelf is brought to you by It's Rapid. It's Rapid is the platform Pepsi, Sierra Nevada, Revlon, and hundreds of other leading brands and retailers use to build personalized content at scale. Whether that's images, videos, or product descriptions for their product detail pages, shoppable videos or banners for their digital ad campaigns, or sell sheets for sales enablement, brands that use It's Rapid are able to produce high-quality, on-brand content on average more than 80% faster than category competitors. To find out more, please visit itsrapid.ai. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Beyond the Shelf.